Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay in the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
The Black and Gold Banneret Podcast is brought to you by Orlando Homes Express, brokered by eXp Realty, proudly serving Orange, Seminole, and Lake counties. Call 407-790-9957 or visit WeSellOrlando.net. What's happening tonight, fans? Welcome to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Happy holidays. We're actually recording this less than a week away from Christmas. And some presents are under the tree, as this is going to be our early signing period show. I'm Jeff Sharon, alongside Brian Murphy, Spokes_Murphy on Twitter. What's up, Brian?
That joke wasn't as bad as you made it out to be.
I know. I actually, I'm really proud of myself. And joining us for the very first time, in the stead of Eric Lopez, which means the show is going to be about half the length that it normally is, Zach Goodall joins us on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. What's up, Zach?
I'm really happy to be here, guys. It's been my lifelong dream to show up on this show, so I've got some butterflies in my stomach, and I'm ready to talk about my UCF Knights, because God knows I'm going to have a lot more fun with this than I do about the Jaguars.
I actually believe you when you say your lifelong dream, because you're like 3 years old. But anyway,
I literally promise you.
So we are blackandgoldbanneret.com, SB Nation's home for the UCF Knights. You can reach us at blackandgoldbanneret.com or on Twitter at UCF_Banneret. And on Facebook at facebook.com/Black and Gold Banneret. You can also subscribe to this podcast if you don't already on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn. All right, so here we are. It's December. By the way, a little bit later, we're going to talk some basketball. Obviously, the fall sports have wrapped up, so we don't have to worry about that. But there is some football news, and it doesn't even have to do with the bowl game or the playoff. Can you believe that? We've begun the early signing period, the 2018-2019 early signing period for football, and it was a pretty good one for UCF. They signed on the order of 20 guys to the latest class. Let's see if I can get all the talking points correct. Let's see. This is the greatest class in school history. We filled all of the needs that we needed to fill for the next coming years. The future is very, very bright. There's a lot of speed. There's a lot of size. Okay, so we've covered all of the talking points. There we go.
Don't forget that anyone that chose a different school over UCF was definitely paid.
Yeah, they were definitely paid. There was some cheating going on, and we didn't really want them anyway. All right, but no, let's actually talk about this class, because I think that, all right, we talk about the transition in recruiting from George O'Leary to Scott Frost. It was fairly obvious, right? We went from, O'Leary kind of guys, mostly from the state of Georgia, to Florida outright speed, okay, especially trying to get kids from Central and South Florida. The change from Scott Frost to Josh Heupel, I think, has been a little bit more subtle. Zach, I want to start with you. What have you noticed about, now that we have this second full class under the Heupel regime in the books, what have you noticed about what Heupel wants and how that's different from what Frost wanted initially?
Well, I see a lot of similarities because they like to do a lot of the same things, except, Frost was all about speed, and Heupel was essentially like a coked up version of what Frost wanted, and in the best way possible, because
I was going to say, what does that mean?
In the best way possible, I promise, because speed times freaking 10. And I'm actually buddies, used to be. We don't really talk much anymore because he's famous and I'm not. With Kayvon Ahmad, who was one of the signings last year, because I played football with him when he lived in the Jacksonville area before moving back to Texas. And he was like the prized possession of Frost's class, and then he stuck around with when Heupel came through. Heupel was given like a week, 2 weeks maybe, to get ready for early signing period after he got hired last year. But there was emphasis on speed in Frost's class, and we saw that again. And not even just speed, but guys in general that can move in this class. And up at the top, I mean, it is a top-heavy class. In bringing in a defensive tackle from St. Petersburg and Keenan Hester, the dude is exactly what Randy Shannon wants in a defensive lineman. And when he was at Florida, Randy Shannon was kind of known for having these guys that weren't as technically sound as defensive linemen, but my God, if they weren't fast off the line. And that's exactly what Keenan Hester as well as Raymond Cutts both are. They're explosive out of their stance. They're the first ones into the backfield, and that generally led to their high production. Is just, at the high school level, there's not a ton of technique you can learn because you come and go while your body is still developing. And there's just, it's not like the NFL where technique is so refined. And you could see that on these guys' film that they were just the true explosive, like, mismatches against the teams that they went against. And that's exactly what Randy Shannon wants in a defensive lineman. So you see that in Hester, you see that in Cutts, just guys that can move. You see that on the opposite side. Adrian Medley, he was a flip from Texas A&M who was one of the more exciting guys that signed, in my opinion. I know an offensive lineman's not necessarily exciting, but he was a Texas A&M flip with offers from Alabama, Clemson, a bunch of I think he had 10 SEC offers, and he flipped from an SEC school to UCF. So suck it, haters. But I
coming in hot in his first podcast. Look at that, Brian. Jeez.
I like to try and make it as entertaining as possible. But he's like that. He's from an offensive lineman standpoint, is the dude's incredibly quick out of his stance. He can move. He likes to move his feet. He never has any dead feet when he's moving. He's constantly moving. Demarius Good was a Miami flip. Essentially, he decommitted from Miami, I think 3 weeks ago or something like that. Ended up with UCF, so kind of a steal. He's their second highest graded prospect. He's an athlete that played running back, but I wouldn't be shocked if maybe they move him to corner.
Local kid too, out of Lake Brantley as well. So
yeah, exactly. So, and that's the thing, is that this is that's another thing with Heupel, is that he's followed in Frost's footsteps and really getting Florida, and some South Florida guys as well were interested. There was cornerback, I think Jason Brownlee, who was a tie pretty much tied up between Florida State and UCF, a 4-star by ESPN, and he ended up sliding with FSU, but it seemed like a real tough decision. He had a teammate coming here in Arian Johnson, Amari Johnson.
Amari Johnson, yeah.
It's become an appealing school for guys that have that game-breaking speed that are more likely than not to be the 3-stars that develop into true competitive players that some teams are like, how do we miss this guy? And I think speed is such an important aspect in what developing college talent at this point, because the technique is still, unless you're an Alabama defensive lineman, like, technique is so far from polished at the college level, but you can utilize guys that have such great speed because that technique isn't great from the guys they're going against.
Brian, you were on campus for the post game, yeah, right.
Post-game.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could call it that, actually. For the news conference afterwards with the coaching staff. Was there any useful information you could have gleaned from their reaction to the class today?
It was a Josh Heupel showing for the ages.
So no.
Actually, someone no, exactly. Someone did ask him at the end of the press conference, Coach, did you go 1-0 today in recruiting? And he actually came back with, I think, well, not yet. We went 1/2-0. I think that other half might have been waiting till 5:30 for them to announce Dylan Gabriel, because clearly they knew they had Dylan Gabriel already by the time we talked to Heupel at 3:30. They've put out a video showing sort of the timeline of how certain recruits committed and signed on the dotted line today, and you could tell that they had known that they got Gabriel locked in before we met with Heupel at 3:30, but he had to be coy about it and be, just couldn't say anything because it wasn't official. And then at 5:30, UCF gets what many will just, kind of without even looking at him, just say it's the next Mackenzie Milton, because of where he came from and where he went to school.
Well, Dillon Gabriel is a quarterback. He went to Miliani High School just like Mackenzie Milton did. Supposedly talked with Mackenzie every day. I guess when you look back on it in retrospect, maybe this is not as much of a surprise as everyone was making it out to be. He's a lefty. He's 6 feet tall. He is 185 pounds. He's also, if I'm not mistaken, I think the all-time leading passer in the state of Hawaii, in the history of the state of Hawaii. Okay.
Now ahead of Tua.
And now ahead of Tua, which, take that, Bama. Yeah, I know. But Zach, have you had the chance to break him down? And, well, let's put the question out there. Is he the next Mackenzie Milton?
I haven't done enough tape with him because I like to really dedicate a lot of time to quarterbacks, because if there is any position coming to the college level where, like, maybe not as much technique, but like truly getting an idea to where their mind state is as a player, like quarterback's obviously going to be that position. But he was obviously highly touted. He had a lot of interest from Georgia. They flipped the Ohio State commit today. I can't remember his name. Obviously, with the controversy of Justin Fields, they wanted to shore up the quarterback position behind Jake Fromm. So I'm sure that that signing from the Ohio State flip kind of, pushed Georgia down Dillon Gabriel's list.
That's Dwan Mathis, by the way, that you're talking about. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
USC came along late. Like December 15th was his official visit. They only have 3 pro quarterbacks on their roster. They did have a commit, but I'm pretty sure he was a 3-star as well. So he wasn't anything to, truly hang your hat on for a program like USC and the talent pool that they have. But Cliff Kingsbury, who was just hired in the past, week or two by USC to be the offensive coordinator, was the primary recruiter. So that tells you just how long, how short of time really that they had dedicated to Gabriel, but they definitely shot up his list. He posted that USC was in his top 3 as of, I think, 2 days ago. But when you looked at all the factors and you knew USC did have another commit, UCF didn't after losing Charlie Dean about a month ago to Harvard. The quarterback situation as it is here with KZ and his injury, Max obviously probably going to be the favorite to start next year. They've got Quadri Jones. I've heard potential little whispers about something that could be going on Friday, but I'm not going to.
Oh, wait a second. What?
I can't give anything out yet. Just keep your eyes peeled onto Twitter for later in the day. Just any night's news that you can find. I don't know. Like, this isn't official. This is just some whispers. But pretty much. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut in, but you're saying there could be another quarterback? Possibly.
Maybe. I might have said too much. No, it's not Justin Fields. But if you want, but apparently there's a direct source to Justin Fields that is saying UCF might be of a little bit of interest, obviously behind the Ohio States and Oklahomas of the world. But it was on Dogs Nation or something like that, like a legitimate outlet. Just recently posted an hour or two before we recorded this that UCF has Fields' attention, which is really freaking cool, because just to give it to Gator fans after all the back and forth that's been going on between the fan bases, to see Fields end up here and UF getting shut down by Fields twice would just be hilarious. But no, I really might be saying too much. Just keep eyes peeled to Twitter sometime on Friday. There's no confirmation if this is definitely going to happen. I've just heard little whispers about something that could be exciting for UCF in their offense. But with Gabriel, that pretty much sums it up right there, is that we don't know exactly what might happen on Friday, as much as we don't know what will happen with the UCF quarterback position. If Mackenzie Milton will be able to make the full recovery everyone wants him to, and maybe be back in late 2019 or in 2020, which, if I were KZ, I'd say we should probably give it till 2020.
Yeah.
But with Mac, with Quadri Jones, I mean, Gabriel saw an opportunity where he could come in and maybe while he's really young, compete with Mac and Quadri Jones, and at absolute minimum, he's going to be the youngest quarterback on the roster with this group of guys that they have, and he should be able to maybe one day win the job. And what a transition that'd be from Milton to Gabriel, from the exact same high school, pretty much the same frame. I think that'd be a really cool storyline.
Now, this intrigues me though, because there's still this guy named Darryl Mack who's going to be starting the Fiesta Bowl and had a career game in the American Athletic Conference Championship. Granted, Darryl Mack, he did look a little shaky in the ECU game, throwing the ball as he did in the second half of the South Florida game when he came in after KZ got hurt. Now, is this what coaches do? Where I know that coaches like to say, we want to get one quarterback a year. If a guy transfers eventually, then he transfers eventually. But we want to have one guy at least in the shuffle every year because you never know what's going to come down. Is there any indication that the reason why UCF is showing so much interest in these quarterbacks is that they may have doubts about Darryl Mack going forward, or is this just like doing their due diligence as far as the recruiting class is concerned?
I think it's probably a healthy mix of both. And I mean, let alone doubt in Mack because of his inexperience, but doubt because of Milton's injury. And they probably, while they ultimately have more info than any of us do, like, there has to be doubt with exactly how he'll be able to come back from such a terrible, terrible injury.
Right.
Prayers up that he does, though, because he's one of my favorite players I've ever watched in my young life. But I think it's a mix of both. There could be a little bit of uncomfort with Mac because there's obviously room for improvement in his game, a little bit more consistency as a passer, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that he does have the respect of this team right now. He should be having more experience than Quadri. Obviously, he's going to have more experience than Gabriel because Gabriel will literally just be joining the team in January. That he should be the favorite to start. But in my covering of the Jaguars in the NFL draft, the idea that people love to throw around is that teams should draft a quarterback every year, whether it's early, whether it's with their last pick in the 7th round, just to have a guy, groom him, let him compete for at least a practice squad or backup role, because it's such a premium position. And while you're more likely to find your guy in the 1st round than you are with the 199th overall pick in Tom Brady, it never hurts to just reach for any type of potential you can get at what's ultimately the most important position in all of sports. So I get it. If they're trying to get some insurance in case Mac isn't ready to be a full-time starter, or they're just trying to, have a quarterback every year because they want to try and have, a guy in the wings, and just in case, or just to develop their own guy. Either way, I mean, make it quarterback like quarterback UCF.
Yeah.
UC fast, UC fierce, quarterback UCF.
Right. The
hashtags aplenty.
Yeah, I know. The marketing just writes itself. When you look at this class in general, and I'll throw this open to both of you guys, did UCF fill the needs that they had going forward, at least with some of the guys who are graduating or moving on after this year, or are there still some holes to fill, do you think? And Brian, I guess I'll start with you on this, because you're talking to the coaches and you're seeing some of the things where that they might be concerned about. Did they find the things that they needed to find, or are there still going to be some areas of concern as we head in towards the spring?
I think there was a big emphasis in this, and I think there was a big emphasis last time too, but about building on the interior and on your lines in total. And they kind of did that. I mean, if you care about star ratings, in terms of stars, Hester and Medley, who we've already mentioned in this podcast, a guy on each side of the line, they are the top-rated prospects of this class. And I think overall, you saw that they need to they know they need to get more depth and more prospects in those areas. They're basically losing the entire left side of their offensive line with Wyatt Miller and Tyler Hudanik leaving, and then the defensive line, you've got a lot of guys who are gone with Titus Davis and Joey Connors and AJ Wooten. Could Tristan Hill go to the pros? I've heard things. So we'll see. And so they have a lot of changes they need to make. I've heard things. They have a lot of changes they need to make on both those lines. I think they try to address that pretty hard today. And I think in that aspect, considering the athletes they got on each side of the line, I think they should be pretty happy.
How about you, Zach?
I agree with that. I think that, the immediate needs that pop off to you are things that they addressed at the top of the class, which just makes it better and better. But I've also worried about corners throughout the year because, I can't even tell you some of the names of the corners that I was afraid they were going to have to play when I was down there for the Pitt game. Was it Neville Clark that might have gotten hurt at some point? And they already had Robinson go down at the very start of the year. And there was, you look at their roster and you immediately thought that they were going to have to put in, I think it was like Dylan Lester at corner, who was a true freshman at that time. So, obviously it's not ideal for a team that is, granted they were left out, but ultimately the idea is that they should be contending for a playoff spot. It's not really ideal to have a low tier 3-star true freshman coming in and starting at corner for you. So I thought that they would really need to attack that depth. And according to 247, they had two pretty fairly rated 3-star corners in Gerard Baker, who chose UCF over the likes of Baylor, Arizona State. That was a really nice signing. He's 6 foot, 175 pounds, the 101st best corner in the nation. And obviously there's so many corners in the nation. So while that doesn't sound great at first glance, I'd say for a school like UCF and the normal talent they pull in, that's pretty good. And Justin Bernard out of McDonough, Georgia. He is a guy that's played corner. I'm pretty sure he's played receiver and running back as well. So he's a real athletic dude. They brought him in. So that's two corners right there. They're athletes. They can try and turn into potential corners. Like Demarius Good could very well end up doing that. I think he's got the experience playing it as well as running back. Tay Gowan, who is one of my favorite signings, I said before we went on air, just because his first name starts with T and the last name ends with Gowan. So like my favorite player on the UCF offense, Taj McGowan. But he's a community school transfer, 3-star, lengthy dude at 6'2", 170, so he can immediately provide some ability to come in and play. He might not start, but I figure he could probably get some early playing time. Adding corners was one of the things I really thought they were going to need to come in and do early this year, and they should have at least 3 in their initial wave of signings, and I think that's really important.
I'm really excited for? Swervin Allen Curvin from Tarpon Springs, the punter that got taken in. 6'1", 185, and the kid can boom it. And apparently he can also he also serves as place kicker too. So who knows? We might have a situation where we have, just like we had Javier Borlegi back in the day, a guy who maybe kicked and punted. I don't know if that's what Josh Heupel wants to do, but Curvin can do it both. So,
well,
so I want to get that out
UCF, there. I know, even if we're not even joking, UCF is losing both of its punter and field goal kicker this year.
Yeah, it's and that's I think people kind of forget how important that is, too, because kickers and punters are kind of an afterthought, but hashtag college kickers, right? We know how important that is.
Mac Loudermilk gets a lot of pub because of his,
because he looks like a Viking raider, But
yeah, basically, yeah, he's we all know he's straight out of Game of Thrones, but he's been pretty good. And Matty Wright has been nails, for at least a couple of years,
right?
Yeah, and in an era when games are decided by so often by one possession, quite often a field goal. This is one of those chances where, you kind of have to hit on some of these recruits. So this should be a lot of fun to see actually how the rest of this class works out. And of course, you heard it here from Zach that UCF may not be done yet. We're going to hold that to you, Zach, on your first appearance here on the show.
Now I'm really nervous.
Now you need to be nervous. No, real quick before we leave, any updates on any guys who might be looking at UCF in the now not so important spring signing period?
So when I did my, primer pretty much on early signing day, there were some guys. I looked at ESPN because 247 didn't have as much of this kind of stuff down as some guys that were reportedly considering UCF. And I'm quite honest, because I worked during the day, I didn't keep up to see if they signed anywhere. But from what I had heard before is that these guys weren't planning on signing just yet. And that being receiver and athlete Kenny Logan out of Pedro Menendez in St. Augustine. He's a 4-star receiver by ESPN, 3-star athlete by 247. About 30 minutes from where I live. But he's received a lot of Power 5 and SEC interest. But he reportedly has warm interest in UCF himself, and he's a fast dude on tape. Probably throw him in at receiver because they've got a lot of experience at receiver that in some might stick around, but at the same time, they can build a really young, like electric nuclei, I guess is a good word I can use there at receiver, in a guy like Logan, guy like Kayvon Ahmad. And then another one is Brett Seether. He's a tight end. Big tight end, like 6'5", 230, out of Clearwater Central Catholic, down in the Tampa, St. Pete area. He's from Maryland. He has an offer from Maryland. That obviously sounds like if he's a guy that loved Maryland, he would probably want to go there. But from a dude I've talked to who covers sports down in the Tampa, St. Pete area, he said that the dude is getting a lot more interest and honestly should probably be a 4-star tight end, just all in all. UCF has some bodies at tight end, but I mean, they didn't know what they were going to do at tight end this year until Kalubi Ali kind of started to break out a little bit more as like a 6-year senior. So
yeah.
You could argue that tight end is one of the biggest offensive needs here because they need some youth and they need some electricity from the position, being that it's such a spread out offense that can use a pass catching tight end. And that's essentially what Brett Seether would do. Whether or not he decides to go to Maryland, or I think TCU had some creeping interest, but much like Kenny Logan, it's reported by 247 that Seether has warm interest in UCF. So those would be two guys to keep an eye on, because I have a feeling that if they do a big hat ceremony and they pick one, UCF should be on both of their tables.
Yeah, Pitt, Maryland, Washington, or Michigan State rather, and UCF are listed under Seether's profile on 247. Interestingly enough, his most recent tweet was, as of this podcast, was retweeting the UCF Football account and their tweet that announced Alan Curvin. So hey, everything in the end comes back to your kickers. But all right, so we'll be keeping an eye on those guys. Zach, I can't thank you enough for the work that you've done for us, this fall in your film breakdowns, which are really fantastic. And then also doing the work on the recruiting stuff so far. Tell us about some of the other stuff that you're doing, and tell us how people can follow your work, because you don't only do stuff for us, you do stuff for Locked On Jags as well, following the Jaguars.
If you guys want to see in-depth tweets about how the Jaguars need to rebuild their team this offseason, as well as the occasional tweet firing off at a University of Florida fan from a UCF standpoint, make sure to follow on Twitter at Zach _Goodall. That's spelled with an H, the right way to spell Zach. But in all seriousness, I try and pump as much work out there regarding both the Jaguars and UCF. Those are my two teams through and through, no matter what, no matter where the sports world, any potential journalism gigs take me. Like, these are my two teams. I bleed black and teal and black and gold in a collegiate standpoint. So you guys can follow all my work there. Locked On Jaguars is my podcast and website for the Jaguars, and as much work here at Black and Gold Banneret that I can get done. Go Knights. Great recruiting class, I think, in my opinion, to start off this year.
Well, you see, Brian and I are Giants fans, but so we both have a very soft spot in our heart for Tom Coughlin, and we end up knowing way too much about Jacksonville, and way more than we probably should, because we follow you so closely. So once again, Zach with an H _Goodall on Twitter. Zach, thanks for joining us, man, and we'll be keeping an eye on Twitter for if anything happens on Friday.
I appreciate you guys having me. Yeah, eyes peeled later in the day.
All right. Stick around when we come back here on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Brian and I are going to riff a little bit about basketball, both men's and women's, as they head down the stretch of the end of the non-conference schedule and get ready for conference play coming up in the new year. Stick around. The Black and Gold Banneret Podcast is back after this. The Black and Gold Banneret Podcast is brought to you by Orlando Homes Express, brokered by eXp Realty. Sam Unger and his team at Orlando Homes Express proudly serve Orange, Seminole, and Lake counties, specializing in buying, selling, and new construction. Sam is a very proud UCF graduate, class of 2006, and he's got a special deal going on right now for the 2018 UCF football season. Night fans, in honor of UCF's 25-game win streak, Sam is running a special for the whole month of December. If you use him as your realtor to buy or sell your home, you'll receive up to $2,500 at closing. So, if you're ready to buy a new home or sell your current home, upgrade or downsize, Sam and his team have you covered so you can find the right home at the right price in the right location. So give them a call right now at 407-790-9957. Again, that's 407-790-9957. Or visit them on the web at WeSellOrlando.net. Again, that's WeSellOrlando.net. You can also reach them on Facebook at Facebook.com/WeSellOrlando. Get in touch with Orlando Homes Express today and make finding your dream home a reality.
Hello, Night Nation. I'm Andrew Fegley.
And I'm Trey Strelko. Where are we? This isn't our usual spot.
It looks like we've landed in the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those guys.
You know, Nightline has UCF sports covered.
Week in and week out, we bring you interviews with newsmakers and in-depth analysis of UCF sports.
Subscribe to our weekly podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Be sure to subscribe to Nightline on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at UCF_Nightline.
Trace, can we go back to the 1148 studios now and start working on our next all-new Nightline?
How do we get out of here? Go Knights!
Charge on.
Now back to you guys in the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
All right, we're back here at the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff, Sharon, Brian Murphy with you. Thanks again to Zach Goodall for hanging out with us to talk football recruiting. Make sure you, again, follow him at Zach_Goodall. We wanted to hit up on basketball. This is going to be a relatively short episode, like I mentioned, because A, Eric's not here, and B, it's the wintertime. It's December. There's not much going on. We're 6 days away from Christmas. But there was some UCF basketball to talk about with, a game against an old rival on Sunday, December the 16th against Stetson. UCF wins by 25 in that game, Brian. And, we pretty much expected that would happen, but possibly by, I can't believe I'm about to say this. This is going to sound so stupid, but probably by a larger margin than they end up winning. But, as though a 25-point victory on the home court is over another Division I team is not enough, especially when you score 90 points for your second consecutive game, but the Knights do get the job done. And it looked like they kind of, I don't want to say that they held back at times, but Aubrey Dawkins led the team with 19 plus 13 boards, double for him. What a game that was for him. But what did you glean from this game? Because it was, it's kind of hard to get a read on any sort of new things that the team is doing in a game like that against Stetson, where Stetson's just bad. You roll the ball out there and you're going to beat them unless something really goes horribly wrong. But as you come down the stretch here with only one non-conference game left against Illinois State on Friday the 21st here, what did we learn from this in terms of what Johnny Dawkins' team is trying to get squared away before we start conference play on January 2nd against Temple?
Well, I think there were a couple of takeaways more than just the win or the margin of victory, which again is, like I said, it doesn't really matter. UCF I think got outscored, quote unquote, like 7-1. So it could have been like 32 or plus 30, but there was plus 25 anyway. That doesn't matter. I think what I think the two takeaways out of this game for UCF against Stetson were, one, we know that this team has had trouble sort of building upon or maintaining large leads, double-digit leads. Remember against FAU early in the year at home here, I think they were up by, I want to say 17
right at
one point, and then ended up losing that game. Same thing really against Georgia Southern, in a game in which they were up big, and then they sort of had to scramble thanks to BJ Taylor and his just amazing play to sort of pull that one out of the fire. So you wanted to see them sort of, all right, gain control, which they did at 15-0, win his lunch, and then go from there and build upon it. And they were able to do that. And again, it comes with all the caveats that, Stetson is probably one of the 50 worst teams in Division I college basketball. And, there's 300 plus of them. So they're really bad. But at least it happened. At least we saw that. That is a positive. If you want to take one, go into the next game. I think two also, and it's certainly nothing small. The last couple of games, this team has been pretty good from the free throw line, and this has been something that we've talked about as being a UCF's bugaboo, really since Johnny Dawkins has gotten here a couple of years ago. They really have not shot well consistently from the free throw line. And the last couple of games, we've seen them do much better. Taco Fall is actually making free throws, which, I mean, if he gives you even four, I stop the presses, Jeffrey. Taco Fall is making free throws, and even if he gives you like 40 to 50%, you'll take that, because he was meandering around 25% at one point in the season.
Right.
And look, if this team can hit like 70. I'd say 71 to 75%. That sounds very exact, but really 71 to 75% of its free throws. That's a big difference for this team offensively, which usually is somewhere in the 60s, mid to high 60s. Those points are valuable, and Johnny's always talked about how they shoot free throws really well in practice, and everything you hear a coach say about, well, they do in practice is great. They just got to carry it over to the game, and their touch is there. They're just not good in the good bounces. I don't know. Maybe that we'll look back on this, and I'll have wasted 2 minutes of your life talking about this, and they'll go back to being a sub-average free throw shooting team. But that's important for this team offensively. Again, they're not gonna want to outscore you. They're not gonna want to score 90 points a game. So for them to get 3 to 5 extra points that they wouldn't have gotten last year from the line could be a huge difference for this team.
I just feel like the thing that I get worried about so much in watching this team and it is the fact that Taco is such a liability in close games down the stretch because of his free throw shooting, and you're forced to take him out of the game essentially if you're in a 2, 3, 4 possession game down the stretch because of his poor showing at the foul line. Nothing against Chad Brown, but it's nice if in the final moments in a close game, if you can have a 7'7" rim protector back there, keeping guys out of the paint. But they see it because of the free throw shooting. Do you feel that they can overcome that sort of baked in virus, if you will, of having of Taco having trouble at the line?
Yeah, I think so. Look again. It's not like they want him to be Mark Price.
Well,
they want him to maybe hit 50% at best. If he can hit 50%, that's gravy. It's really not him. It's about everyone else chipping in and being at 70% or better. And then if Taco can get to 50, that is amazing.
But you can see how other teams can do like a hack a Taco and things can get out of hand.
They guarded against that close and late versus Missouri. I mean, they basically rotated Taco in and out of the game depending on where they had possession. But I think we've also seen in the last couple of games, and again, it's really hard to draw upon what progress this team is making when they have a game against Stetson in the middle there. Yeah, I don't know if that game means anything at all. Just again, Stetson's that bad. But without Taco on the floor, and they put Chad Brown out there, or maybe it's Chad Brown and Colin Smith, or maybe it's just Colin Smith really at the 5. It gives them a different look, a look that I've talked about before. They did not have anything close to this last year. I don't want to. I'll say the word Rokas Ovidas, and I know that you can't really say that too much.
Now I'm going to get the little E pegged on me for explicit language on this podcast. Thanks a lot, Brian.
I'm gonna get an angry email from somebody about this. I know it.
Yeah.
But with Colin Smith transferring in from George Washington, it's a new facet to this team they didn't have. That when Taco comes out, not only are they still pretty good in the paint, but they can run a different style of ball. They can really play at different paces, different speeds, different rotations, which I still think they're figuring out. As far as who can play when and where and with whom.
Right.
I will say also it's my weekly obligation to say more Frank Birds. And I think it's a pretty dangerous team if they can get it all to mesh together. Because if it all meshes together, we know Taco's there and BJ's great and Aubrey is showing his ability. He's getting better as a rebounder and obviously he's a dangerous scorer when hot. But then you've got guys like Colin Smith, who is very versatile. Chad Brown is out there doing his thing of like just crashing boards and being reckless and getting blocks and bringing energy. Frank Birds is hitting threes. Cesar DeJesus is driving in the lane really well. And they got guys who do a lot. They don't have a guy who is – I don't think they have somebody on this team who is great at everything. But I think they have a lot of guys who are good at some things. And I think that all meshes together to make a really good unit. And, again, we'll find out more when conference play comes around right after the new year. But far be it from me to say that this team has turned a corner after a win after Stetson.
Right.
But it certainly looks better than it did 2 weeks ago.
Well, here we are talking about them, quote, turning a corner, end quote, and they're 9-2. You know, I know, and I know that the two were just. I mean, they were. I mean, even still to this day, here we are. You know, weeks later, and we want to. You know,
they should be 11-0.
Yeah, they should be 11-0. I mean, they kind of blew the late game situation against Mizzou, and then they blew that big lead against FAU. But you know, maybe we look back on that and say, hey, this is when they figured out how to how to really play together. So again, Illinois State on Friday at 7 at CFE Arena. That game's on ESPN 3. January 2nd, Wednesday, 7 p.m. conference play starts against Temple at CFE Arena. That game will be televised on ESPN News, and plenty of ESPN News and ESPNU dates coming up as well. Possibly one on ESPN2 against UConn at the end of January. But nonetheless, things to keep an eye on for UCF men's basketball as they head down the stretch and get ready for conference play in the new year. All right, speaking of getting ready for conference play in the new year, UCF women's basketball is off to a 9-1 start. Their most recent victory was on Monday, a couple days ago, against the University of the Pacific, 64-57, in a game that it was not a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination for either team. UCF won the game despite shooting 18 of 56 from the field. It's 32%, but they shot 25. They shot 32 free throws. And made 25 of them. KK Wright was the night's leading scorer with 27 points, 16 of them coming at the line. She set a new school record, 16 free throws made in one game. She was 16 of 18 to get the 27. Sydney McDonald added 10 on 4 of 9 shooting, including a pair of threes. And Coach Abe's team, but let's give them credit for the defense because they held Pacific, which is... watching them, now I did PA for the game, full disclosure, so I've got a front row seat. And Pacific plays a very sort of unorthodox, up-tempo, quick shooting. I liken it to like a classic West Coast basketball, where they don't play the game with the tempo that, say, a UConn does or a USF, but maybe they're a little bit closer to what USF does, but they're interested in getting off quick shots. They took a lot of threes in this game. They were only 5 of 21 from 3-point range. But they shot only 33% in this game. And despite making more field goals than UCF, they still lost the game. Pacific did by 7 points. I think I was more interested in seeing like how the defense would actually work when they were tested by a team that does play a different system, which they passed that test. Remember, they lost to Pacific last year in a very close game. So what I think is interesting about this team, though, Brian, is they have these 3 non-conference games left before the new year. They next go to St. Petersburg for the St. Pete Shootout where they play Liberty on Friday and then Syracuse on Saturday before they finish up Sunday, December 30th at Quinnipiac and then start conference play Saturday, January 5th at Memphis. Not a lot of home games for this team this year, by the way. They've only played 4 games at home. But I hopped on realtimerpi.com today, and UCF's RPI, women's basketball, right now, is with a record of 9-1. Their RPI in the country is 12th.
Oh.
And let's give them some credit for those early season victories. Against Villanova, they did have the loss at Central Michigan, but Central Michigan's RPI 44. They beat Villanova, RPI 33. They beat Duquesne, RPI 49. Beat Pacific, RPI 64. They have Liberty coming up, whose RPI is 314, not that great. But coming up after that, Syracuse with an RPI of 14. So here's where I think, Brian, that we're going to really find out where this team is made of as they do those back-to-back nights in St. Pete before we get ready to see them play against UConn, whose RPI, strangely enough, is at number 2. And I'm really interested to see what this team can achieve. So far they've been healthy. But I looked at that RPI number. I was like, wow, okay, RPI 12. This kind of has the early makings of sort of the women's basketball version of volleyball, if you will. When all of a sudden they play that pretty strong early season schedule, and then all of a sudden, boom, things kind of worked out for them.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned it, Jeff. And what's impressive to me is you're 9-1 with only 4 home games. I mean, you want to talk about a team that once you get into a tournament setting, as this team has aspirations for, they've been tested. They know what it is like to play in sort of not favorable environments, and that's going to help you down the road in March. Yeah,
it's not going to get any easier. As they have the neutral site. Like I said, there's 2 games in St. Pete, at Quinnipiac in Connecticut, so that's a long road trip. And then they start the conference regular season at Memphis and then at South Florida. And the South Florida game, I think, is the one that I'm going to be really interested in watching because, like we mentioned, according to realtimerpi.com, USF is 9-2 right now, obviously in their record, with an RPI of 95, but we know how good they are. If you take UConn out, they would be the overwhelming favorite in the American. So what do they do in that game in Tampa against that team? I think I have that date circled on the calendar, as do a lot of people, as they should. That game would be on ESPN3 eventually. But
are you going to be conflicted at all when they play Syracuse?
Yeah. I'll tell you why. Syracuse women's basketball has been has not been a factor at all until the last few years. They've performed a lot of investment in that program. They used to play in the old Manley Fieldhouse, which was where the men's basketball team used to play before they opened up the Carrier Dome. They still played basketball in the Manley Fieldhouse. Well, then they turned Manley into the football team's indoor practice facility. So they decided, let's move the women's team into the Carrier Dome too. So they play in the Carrier Dome now. And since they made that move, now I'm not saying that playing in the Carrier Dome, because sometimes they play before some empty crowds in the Carrier Dome, but when you're talking about a 50,000 seat football stadium, that's pretty much what you're going to get. And we know that Syracuse really is a basketball school, but they've made this investment in women's basketball that has I think paid dividends. So, and we see it now with an RPI. They have an RPI of 14 coming in. The Orange are 9-2 on the year, like we mentioned earlier. So, I think that'll be an interesting test for UCF on a neutral floor in St. Pete, relatively close to home, but still not exactly home. I'm going to be very interested to watch that game. They don't have any live video coverage, unfortunately, at least not that we know of the St. Pete shootout. We'll have to deal with live stats and listen to Scotty Adams' broadcast. But still, I'm very intrigued to see what comes out. I think that'll be a good preview of what to expect from UCF once we get into conference play, because I think that what's the style that Syracuse plays is going to be very similar to some of the top echelon teams in the American. All right, Brian, let's wrap this thing up as we finish up here. Obviously, we're still keeping an eye on any late recruiting news. The early signing period ends on Friday. It's actually 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, so we'll see if anything does pop up. What else are you working on? I know you're heading out to Phoenix a few days in advance for the bowl game. I think on the 27th, I think you said you're heading out there?
Yeah, so we can talk about that next week because we'll have a podcast before then, I hope.
I know, yeah. We're going to have one. We're going to have one more hopefully before you head out there.
I leave on the 27th. We should have a podcast on the 26th. We're having a podcast meeting right now.
Right, and it's a Wednesday the 26th. I think usually we record on Wednesday nights, as you guys know. We're trying to get it up on Thursday morning. And we're going to do, our next one's going to be all Fiesta Bowl to try and get everybody ready. And we're going to, and we'll try and dive into a full preview of LSU. By the way, another guy from their defensive side of the ball said he's not playing. Is that right?
Yeah, so Ed Alexander, whom 2016 was an all-freshman team in the SEC, then kind of was a reserve for the last, for 2017, and then entered this year hurt, but has really been LSU's starting defensive tackle, kind of like their big run stopper, lane clogger guy. The second half of this season, he will not play in this game. His mom apparently had said tonight that Ed will focus on the NFL draft and he will skip the Fiesta Bowl. So that is now, from my count, this might be even a low ball count, that's 3 starters that LSU will not have on the defensive side. Ed Alexander in the middle of their defensive line.
Right.
Their first round possible top 10 pick cornerback in Greedy Williams. And then their other starting cornerback who's hurt for this game, Christian Fulton.
So, okay. 2 starting corners on the outside, and your big body in the middle.
Yes.
Interesting.
Just saying.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. All right. We'll keep an eye on that. And by the way, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you follow our SB Nation compadres covering the LSU Tigers and the Valley Shook and thevalleyshook.com. A reference, by the way, to the earthquake game against Auburn. That's where they got the name for their site. But they do such a great job covering LSU football. And if you want to know everything you need to know about the Tigers heading into the Fiesta Bowl, this is the guy you want to know about, or this is the site you need to know about, so that you get everything done that you need to do. So plenty of stuff here that we're actually looking at for the Fiesta Bowl, and also keeping an eye on basketball as well. The spring sports will be firing up soon enough, but we're going to be zeroing in on the Fiesta Bowl here as we wrap up this week and we head toward New Year's Day. All right, lots of folks to thank. I want to thank Zach Goodall once again for joining us and talking about recruiting. You can follow him at Zach with an H _ Goodall. Also, if you're a Jags fan, you just need to follow him. Okay. Also want to thank.
Look, I want to toot Zach's horn here for just a second.
Yes.
One, if you are a Zags fan, there
you go.
College basketball on my mind. If you are a Jags fan, definitely follow him, because his tape breakdowns of some top-notch players like Dwayne Haskins and Justin Herbert and Hollywood Brown, the wide receiver for Oklahoma. He does these long, in-depth, really deep tape breakdowns for each player, and they're fascinating.
They are works of art.
He's done a couple for us with like Titus Davis,
yes,
and another player whom I can't remember, but
he did one on Mackenzie Milton that was really good.
Oh,
too.
He did Mackenzie. That's right, yeah. And they're really good. And also, definitely still go read Zach's signing day primer, because although some of those guys have signed, if you're not familiar with them, he does a really good job of getting you up to speed and getting you knowledgeable about the top prospects in this class. And like we mentioned already on the show, there are a couple guys that he wrote about in that article who have yet to make their decision.
Right.
So we might see them pop up in the next day or so. And if you want to know who they are, Zach has already written about them, and he's done a really good job. And it's I'm envious, because I really, really, really wish I cared more, but I just don't.
I wish I had the knowledge that he had about the game too. So that's the other thing. So make sure you follow Zach and all the work that he does as well. Make sure you follow all of our other guys as well. Luke Saris and the work that he's been doing for us coming through. Eric Lopez has a big series that he's been working on through the dog days of December on future UCF Hall of Famers. He also did a feature on ranking UCF's 9 bowl games that they played so far from worst to best. This will be UCF's 10th bowl game in school history. Kind of hard to believe. Remember the days, Brian, when we were like, will UCF ever actually attend a bowl game? And now they've gone to 10. So, in addition to that, I also wanted to thank Sam Unger for his support throughout the year, throughout really, the last year plus that he's been sponsoring the podcast. Yeah. He's been a tremendous help to us, and he's such a great follow on Twitter. Because he just lives and dies UCF even more than we do combined. But yeah, I want to thank Sam for all of his support throughout this time as well. And thanks, since this is our last episode before we're going to have before the Christmas holiday, we wanted to wish you, the listener, a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, whatever it is that you may celebrate with your friends and family. Please enjoy it safely as well. And like I said, once we get through the Christmas holiday, man, here we go. It's going to be time to take the football field one more time in the 2018-2019 season against the LSU Tigers. Brian Murphy, thank you once again as well. Appreciate you as always, bud.
Bye, Jeffrey.
Spokes_Murphy on Twitter, in case you're interested, which you doggone well should be. And also, if you want to follow me individually for whatever reason, Jeff_Sharon. Follow us collectively at UCF_Banneret and at Facebook.com/Black and Gold Banneret. We are SB Nation's home for your UCF Knights at blackandgoldbanneret.com. For Zach Goodall and Brian Murphy, I'm Jeff Sharon, saying thanks for listening. This has been the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Happy holidays from all of us. We'll catch you on the flip side as we get ready for the 2019 Fiesta Bowl in our next episode.